to make sure he didn't kill my baby cousins. What's that story you've never been able to tell? In 6th grade one night I was like, I really don't feel like going to school tomorrow, so I looked up how to get a fever. I found a tutorial that said to take a bath at the hottest temperature your bathtub will go, and then stay up all night. I decided to try it and I started the water for a steaming hot bath. It stung to get in it, and I somehow survived it for 30 minutes. When I was getting out I felt dizzy and then I fell on the floor and had a seizure. I woke up and saw the blinding ceiling lights of the bathroom and the first thing I thought was, am I dead? And then I threw up in the toilet next to me and had a migraine for the night. And later found out I got first-degree burns. So long story short, don't do that. When I was 17, I worked at a grocery store with a guy named Brian. Normal guy, mid-20s, lil chub. Didn't really think much of him. One day he tells me about how he lives in an apartment by himself and that his neighbors are absolutely crazy. Like they would yell at him to be quiet, pound against the wall to get him to shut up, even though he wouldn't be doing anything. He would sneeze, and his neighbors would scream at the top of their lungs from next door. It was that bad. I didn't really care much when he was telling me this. I just wanted to go home and not work anymore. A couple of days go by and I noticed that Brian wasn't showing up anymore. Whatever. Didn't think much of that either. A month or two goes by and he finally shows back up to work. So, being the nice friend I am, I asked him where he's been. He tells me he was actually fired because he was in the hospital. I didn't think that was a valid reason to fire someone, but what do I know? I didn't comment on that. I asked him why he was in the hospital and he told me it was for personal reasons. I tell him it was good having him back and carried on with my day. Fast forward a couple of days to be talking to another coworker who was good friends with Brian. He says, "Did you hear what happened to Brian? Yeah, he was in the hospital and was fired or something. Do you know why though?" "No," he said, "it was personal." So this is what happened a couple months ago before Brian disappeared. He was at home by himself, when his neighbors, surprise, start yelling at him through the walls for being too loud. Brian, telling himself I've had enough, decides to call the police and have them deal with it. The police arrived and started talking to the neighbors for quite some time. Hours go by with the police and neighbors. So he calls the police again to ask what's taking so long. The police respond with, "We left like an hour and a half ago." Turns out that the neighbors were never yelling at him. In fact, they were never there. Brian was schizophrenic and was hearing voices in his head. He had to go to a mental hospital for a month. Around 42 years ago, my little brother was playing with matches and set the woods on fire, burned about 10 acres. Everyone assumed that it was my smoking in the woods, so he and I just let it be me. I took the blame, and the ass whooping, because Dad was kinda rough on the ass whoopings when he was mad. And I didn't want my little brother to have to take it. Being that Dad got a little carried away this time, broke my arm, we've just never told anyone the truth. I'm 47. Once when I was a kid my dad went nuts about something I did that apparently pissed him off. He burst into my room, threw me face down on my bed, stripped my pants off, and beat my ass with a leather belt until I had huge black and purple stripes down the middle of my back to my thighs. It was extraordinarily frightening and painful, and to this day I have trouble sitting with my back to the door. I didn't say anything to anyone, but I sure as hell know that it wasn't acceptable even from my parents' generation. In 6th grade, we had this paper we had to write. I forget what the subject was. I decided to procrastinate a lot. Then the day it was due rolled around, and I had nothing. We had to read our papers out loud in front of the class. I was totally prepared to take the 0, but then I realized he wasn't actually taking the papers we used. So I decided to go up to the front of the class with a blank sheet of paper, and improvise. I ended up getting an 80. One of the first times I invited my girlfriend to spend the night at my college apartment, I went to bed early. We're both gamers, but I'm an early bird and she's a night owl. She reassured me I could go to sleep without her because, little did I know, she had plans to unlock Toad, Toadette, and the special cup in Mario Kart, DD for the GameCube. My apartment complex had very strict parking. There were only 2 parking passes for me and my roommate, but I encouraged my girlfriend to park in the lot anyway because I'd never seen a friend get towed in the couple of years I lived there. She really didn't want to get towed though, so I promised to pay if she got her car impounded. So I go to bed while she plays Mario Kart all night. Little did I realize she's an absolute freak at the game. I wake up early in the morning to find her passed out from a night of gaming. I fire up the GameCube to play some Mario Kart with breakfast. Not aware she unlocked almost everything in the game. I proudly proclaim, "You got Toad?" Barely awake she responds, "I got Toad? Yeah. You got Toad last night while I was sleeping, I can't believe it." "I got Toad? Yeah. Don't you remember?" She frantically checks behind the blinds to look outside at the parking lot. "I didn't get Toad." "Yeah, you got Toad and Toadette last night?" One of our best moments for sure. That reminds me of my husband and me in our old apartment. The movie Twister had just come out, and I watched it at home. I saw a flash of white and black go by the window, and said, "What was that?" My husband, joking about a scene in the movie, said, "It was probably a cow." I looked out the window, and it was my neighbor's cat. "Black and white, named Cow." "Yep," I said. "It was Cow." I was only joking," said my husband. "It was definitely Cow," I said. It literally turned into the Dude, sweet scene from Dude, Where's My Car? Turns out my husband had no idea my neighbor's cat was named Cow. Too funny. I started doing one of those 5K running apps. On this app, the trainer is named Erin. She coaches you through each training session. I've never been a runner and now can do a solid 5K. But anyway, Erin told me that I've got to have a mantra. Something I can repeat to myself when I want to give up. Her mantra is "You're strong, Erin. Be strong." I could never come up with anything better, so now my mantra is "You're strong, Erin. Be strong." My name isn't even close to Erin, but it doesn't feel right using my own name at this point. I'm surprised how often I want to give up on things and automatically think "You're strong, Erin. Be strong." Edit. Guys, I am so overwhelmed and touched by these replies. Gold and silver and wholesome? Oh my. We are all strong Erins. The time my mum needed to go back into the house to get a scarf. Because of this we were held back and missed a bus by 10 seconds. That bus then crashed into a bridge at a very high speed because the bus driver had mental health problems. It is the closest I have ever been to death. I will never complain about my mum going back to get a scarf in my life again. Something similar happened to me. I was driving my cousin and her husband. We were all very young in our early 20s. We were at a stoplight with limited visibility when I was overcome with heat. I was so hot I was compelled to try and take my sweatshirt off at the red light and asked my cousin to help pull the sleeve. It got stuck over my head and I missed the light right as it turned green. I went to hit my gas and her husband yelled, "Wait," from the backseat. An 18-wheeler ran the red and swooshed directly in front of our car. When I was just a boy I was touched when I was getting my hair cut. My father had to make a quick run to the ATM. So we were alone. I never realized it affected me that much and honestly didn't even think about it for years until I drove by the place where the barbershop used to be and just felt immense stress. I would never tell my father. He has always been insecure about whether or not he's been a good father to me. This would make him hate himself. I'm in a very similar boat. I was molested for years by a trusted teacher, not a school teacher. But I'll keep it vague. Kinda suppressed it for a few years before I realized how it might have fucked me up long term. Currently trying to save money for a therapist. I can't ask my grandparents, who paid for the lessons, or my parents, who were very supportive of the activity he was teaching. They'd be devastated. I didn't want to tell anybody then, because I didn't want to be the kid that got molested. Now I hate myself because I know he had to have done it to other kids and I didn't come forward. He committed suicide a few years ago, and it was some BS reason about his girlfriend breaking up with him. I hope someone blackmailed him into it, the piece of shit. It is not mind-blowing or anything of the sort, which is why I never told it, but when I first started getting sick and couldn't move around the house like usual, my cat would yell at me for 2 minutes until I sat down. He would proceed to purr furiously over my stomach, which was hurting, for about 10 minutes at a time. He would chirp at me if I tried to get up beforehand and keep bumping my leg as I walked past if I never sat down. Little did I know that he was trying to heal my cancer, that was growing into the muscle by that point. He's a little Siamese mix and he is very vocal, and I appreciate his little squeaks of support. He is a very good boy. I had a chat with one of the most notorious pedophiles in my country. It was odd, He spoke in a way that made it seem like he was my age. I was 7. He eventually tried to trick me into touching his dick by buying me a hot dog and a soda. I only declined and bailed because I was low-key offended that he put mustard on the hot dog he was offering me. I moved to the UK from Zimbabwe when I was 4. The first few years my parents spent their whole time trying to settle down. By the time I was 8 they realized we had never been to London. So on a hot June day, we went into London. We went to the aquarium, Covent Garden to see all the performers, on the London Eye. It was a good day. To end the day we went to Buckingham Palace. I was tired so I was resting my head against the bars asking all the questions you'd expect from an 8-year-old. After a while my parents said it was time to go. I pushed away from the bars and then felt the cold steel against the back of my ears. I hadn't noticed my head has slipped through. I panicked. A crowd gathered. I'm probably in many a family photo album. Even a horse guard came to see what the commission was about. Bet he wasn't expecting a child with his head stuck. By then I had accepted this as my new home, but I couldn't figure out how I'd go to sleep with a spike on the floor. Luckily an old lady had a tub of Vaseline in her handbag and my dad was able to pull me out with my head smothered in Vaseline. So I was at a water park with a girl I had a huge crush on and some of our mutual friends. I'm not a big fan of rides. She had been trying to talk me into going on one all day, and I finally agreed to try out this one really intense looking slide. Basically, you go down the slide while sitting on this big inflatable thing, and it was for 2 people so naturally, I got paired up with the girl I had a crush on. We both climbed into the inflatable, which had these little handles on it for you to hold on to when you went down. When we went down the slide, it was way faster than I thought it would be. I accidentally let go of one of the handles, tried to grab it again, and ended up grabbing her hand instead by accident. I was really embarrassed but she put her other hand on top of mine until we reached the bottom. I guess she thought I was scared, which is also kinda embarrassing, but it was a nice moment. She later went on to be my first kiss about 6 months later, and we're still close friends today. Back when I was in high school, I wanted to approach this girl on a bus on my way to school. She was really hot and I knew I'd regret it if I didn't approach her. There was one big problem. There was a middle-aged lady seated next to her and I couldn't talk to this girl with the lady right next to her. I had to think of a quick way to get rid of the lady. I then woke up from my seat, slowly walked to the row they were seated and calmly asked the lady, "Excuse me, ma'am, could you please let me sit next to my sister?" Turns out the lady was the girl's mom. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Western Samoa. One weekend several of my fellow volunteers and I went camping on this tiny private island. On the first or second night, we made a bonfire and all got super drunk then went skinny dipping. The water was only about chest deep, warm and still. There was no light pollution so the stars were blazingly bright. We also inadvertently kicked up some bioluminescence, filling the water with stars. Tipsily floating naked in the warm sea, completely surrounded on all sides by stars, and close friends is one of my most beautiful and euphoric memories. My aunt was forced to hand her kids over to her alcoholic ex for a weekend visitation but she was terrified he'd hurt them so she sent me with them. I was 7 or maybe 8 years old. They were 2 and 4. I thought myself so much older and decided it was the responsible thing to do so I went. While at his apartment, he got wasted and called my aunt and told her he was going to throw them off his very high balcony. They were asleep. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat up all night, no small feat at that age, to make sure he didn't kill my baby cousins. Nobody knows. I think about it daily and wonder if it's why I have panic disorder. I wish there were better ways to protect kids in separations. When I was about 14 I found a slingshot in the woods. It was a pretty good slingshot that must have cost a fair bit as it had a metal frame and a thick rubber sling. One day my friend and I were on top of a hill out in the countryside and a jogger came running out of the nearby tree line. He was some distance away and below us. Without putting a lot of thought into it I shot a stone just above his head. The rock went exactly where I wanted it to, but if there was wind, or my aim was off, or 1,000 other factors, I would have seriously fucked that jogger up. I muse on that at least once a week. I never see my friend and we haven't spoken about it since it happened. When I was in kindergarten I fell asleep on the bus to school. No one woke me up. I wake up eventually and the bus is empty. I panic, as any 5-year-old does, and run to the front of the bus and try the door. It's locked. It was parked in a KFC parking lot, so people were coming in and out of the building. I started wailing with terror, banging on the glass doors, snot pouring down my face and into my mouth as people walked by and pointed at me. They mumbled and got into their car and left. By the time the bus driver finally came back out with her chicken meal, the entire door was covered in my slobber and tears. She instructed me how to open the closed door so she didn't have to put her meal down. I was still freaking out obviously and didn't understand. So she sighed, put her foot down and finally opened the door and asked me what was I doing there. She called the school and drove me there, still covered in snot. I remember walking into my class with everyone standing in a line and hugging me one at a time. After that day, they made a rule for all bus drivers to get up and walk the bus front to back to make sure no kids get left sleeping. My mom probably has a factitious disorder. She used to gather my siblings and me together to announce she has insert cancer or deadly disease here and then make us cry and hug her. She has ruined so many of my major life events to rant about herself and all of her illnesses. I haven't called to check in on her with everything that is going on because I do not want to hear her hours-long spew of disease and sickness because I always think she is lying. She may actually be at serious risk of death from COVID-19 and I still don't want to hear her talk about it. She could die and I think I would feel relief. My father seldom spoke of his wartime experiences. I've only heard 2 direct stories from his mouth. He once recounted how his brother, they fought together, was shot and later died from an infection. The other memory was of his desertion. During a battle, he hurt his wrist from falling and sat there in the mud, wincing in pain and catching his breath. As he peered out, seeing all the death and destruction, he was suddenly hit with an intense feeling of futility. And not just mere futility, but he realized also the absurdity of it all. I got up and just walked away, he said, leaving my weapon right there on the ground. He disappeared into the surrounding woods, somehow managing to get back home, which was nearly 300 miles away. Weren't you worried about getting in trouble? I asked in all my childlike innocence. He explained that things were desperate by the time he entered the war. He was underage, so he lied about his name and age in order to enlist. He received little to no training and was immediately thrust into action. They had nothing on me, he said. I enlisted with little more than a handshake. Although he was ineligible to receive a pension because of his false and/or lacking records, I'm under the impression he never would have accepted such. He was ashamed of that part of history and developed a profound distaste for the government. This story was kept pretty hushed in our family as we didn't want the surrounding community to know of his desertion and label him a coward. I, however, always admired him for doing what he did. In the summer of 2007 I was working my landscaping job when I heard my cell ringing in the truck. My girlfriend at the time told me that they were saying that my brother is dead. Fast forward through a panic drive that I shouldn't have done to my mom's house. She answers the door and crumbles into my arms. I'm stunned. They leave to the cop station and moments after leaving I get a phone call on my mom's phone. It's the guy that was with him, that we're thinking had something to do with his death. He plays stupid and wants inside information on whether or not he's being blamed. He hit him with his truck, killing him instantly. Said in court eventually that he looked at the dash and thought he had hit a deer. They had been witnessed having a fight earlier that day. Without being able to prove intent and no OJ lawyer, he got 4 months in jail. We drove to a neighboring city to deliver the bad news to his 9-year-old daughter. I'll never forget the sound of her cries. My brother was well, my brother. Sharing this has always helped me move on a bit by bit. Thanks for reading. I keep my sex life private, so I have never told anyone about the one and only time I had sex in public, and subsequently the one and only time I got caught having sex. By someone in an airplane. My boyfriend and I were out at the deserted quarry on the edge of town and we were going at it when a little 2-seater plane flew overhead. The plane then proceeded to turn around and fly over us again, this time dipping, wiggling its wings when it was overhead. I grew up in a very conservative household, sex was never talked about at all, and you knew if you got caught with something you shouldn't you'd be in giant trouble. When I was 17 I bought a vibrator. I had literally no experience, even alone, but was super curious. The way it worked was you had to screw the bottom of it on to keep the batteries in and to turn it on. I put it underneath my bed and thought I had it unscrewed enough that it would stay off until later. Well, I'm downstairs listening to a CD player with my headphones on, and suddenly I hear my 2 young sisters yelling about something and running around the house. I take my headphones off and I hear bzzzzzzz echoing through the house. My room was directly above the living room, and my floor was wooden. They're feeling out, thinking there's a wasp in the house or something electrical is about to explode. Thank God my parents weren't home, they probably would have figured it out a lot easier. One sister runs upstairs, realizes it's coming from my room, and I dash ahead of her and just throw myself over the bed to feel underneath it. I turn off the vibrator and then tell them my old phone was under there and must have had an alarm on it, which made no sense, it had been months since I changed phones. They don't believe me and think it must be the pipes under my room. They tell my parents when they get home that the pipes freaked out. My family listens closely for months to see if we need to call a plumber. I decided to take my terrible secret to the grave, and then 10 years later post it on Reddit. The end. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.